Welcome to the Conjugate Nation podcast.
And we're back with Shane Sweat, Chris McDonald, and myself, Jess Bufano. So you want to max a barbell. Today, we're going to talk about the max effort method. The max effort method is one of a couple of different methods used in the conjugate system. In the max method, what we're going to do is we're going to plan as a primary piece for the session, building from an empty bar up to the heaviest bar we can move for that day in that specific movement pattern. From there, we would generally go then into, depending on the nature of the athlete, CrossFitter versus athlete versus powerlifter. As a powerlifter, you'd move from there into secondary pieces, into tertiary pieces or accessory work, and then finishing at a midline. As a CrossFitter, you might max a bar out and then move to a metabolic conditioning piece or accessory or a midline, and an athlete would be somewhere between those two zones. So when we're talking about maxing at a bar, that is a 1 rep max. So there's a big difference between maxing out a squat, bench, dead, whatever it may be for a single rep versus maxing out that bar for a 3 or 5 rep max. One of the biggest pieces that I find the separator between the two is when you're stepping up to a single, the approach and the demeanor of that bar is quite a lot different than when you're performing reps. When you're performing 3 or 5 reps, you know at least you're going to get somewhere in the mix before you potentially might be running into trouble or push to threshold. Versus that single, you know right from the get-go, it's got to be perfect. And that's one of the things I really love about them. So one of the things that I find really awesome about a single is every part of it needs to be perfect to be successful at that lift. So that includes like how you approach the bar, how you set up underneath the bar in the case of something like a squat, where it's that wedging the athlete in, the stand and walk out of the position, or even standing in a mono. And then the descent, every piece has to be exactly right to be successful. And I always feel like it displays something that is really unique, that is not displayed when you start doing 3s, 5s, and you start to see those patterns break down.
Yeah, so when we work up to a max, like I said, we're trying to increase our absolute strength. But that also means for a CrossFitter that we bring our strength high enough so that we can perform better on our WODs. So that the numbers that show up in our WODs are a little bit lower percentage for us, and then we move in better positions. And then for the portion of CrossFit athletes, when you're trying to increase your Olympic lifts or your squat, bench, or deadlift, obviously we need to increase our absolute strength to raise those numbers up. It means that we can produce more force. We are constantly varying what we do. You know, we're using different types of bars, different type of variations of squats, different types of deadlifts, good mornings. You have to realize that, you know, a squat raises your deadlift, a deadlift raises your squat, good morning raises both of those. Okay? So when we're looking at what we do, we work up to a 1 rep max. And what is different for us than any other system in the world is that we can actually work up to a max every week. Okay? Everybody else has to waive their percentages. So mathematically, they cannot max as frequently as we can. If you hit a max for 3 weeks or more, after your 3rd week, you start to degrade your nervous system traditionally. Okay? And so for us, how we can get away with maxing for more than 3 weeks in a row is by the change of bars, change of movement patterns that we use. So when you're looking at a 1 rep max squat, for an example, and say we use accommodating resistance, we use chain weight, I can actually overload my squat. Meaning that if I'm a 1,000-pound squatter, 500-pound squatter, doesn't matter. If I'm a 500-pound squatter, in the hole I might have 450 pounds. But when I get to the top, I could have 550. My nervous system will adapt to a heavier stress placed upon it than it would just a straight bar squat. But next week, I could do a good morning. And maybe if I'm a 500-pound squatter, my good morning is, say, 350 pounds for a good morning. So obviously my nervous system is not going to be affected as harshly with that variation. If you squat with a box squat and a safety squat bar, like we use a Krepensek bar, I refer to my bars by percentages. And what I mean by that is if I have a Krepensek bar, that's a 15% bar. It means you're going to squat 15% less with that bar than with a straight bar. So there's different variations of safety squat bars. Some are 10%, some are 15%, and we have some bars at my gym that are 20%, literally meaning you'll squat 20% less. So I want you to think about that. With a 1,000-pound squatter with that bar, they're going to squat 800 pounds as a max. That's 200 pounds less vertical load. It's that much less shear force in their joints. and their nervous system does not get taxed as hard, but they maximally produce force with that bar. If you add in a box squat, for a box, once you are good at a box squat's roughly 15% harder than a regular squat as well. So if you do a 20% bar and a box squat, you're using 35% less weight to get the same work done. Okay, you're still hitting maximal weight, maximal output, but it lets your nervous system have a break. Okay, you're not doing the exact same plane, same angles, same movement, and you're not at the same intensities in a sense. You're going 100% all out, but you're not overloaded. Sometimes you overload, sometimes you're roughly right where your 100% max is, and then sometimes you're using movements that are so difficult and so hard that you're not using anywhere near the weight you'd use if it was a straight weight squat, straight weight deadlift.
I find the other piece of that too is the difference in the level of motivation. So when I found, like, in the past when I've done linear progression and those sort of pieces, like, there are athletes that stuff totally, like, they do just fine, where they're going to do this and they're going to add 5 pounds every week to that lift. And they're just going to build for weeks and weeks and weeks, and they mentally can do that. That's like usually the same dude who's like lifting alone in his garage, windowless, cold, like it's a specific kind of person versus like definitely like CrossFitters. And certainly I found also with sport athletes and even myself as a powerlifter is that the motivation week to week is so much higher when that bar gets changed out every week. So, for us, we're maxing out a squat or a dead on Monday, and then we're going to max out a bench on Wednesdays. And that when you max it out one week and whatever you get as a result, you're like, okay, done. Hopefully you take some pieces away that you can learn from that pattern. So you can find, maybe where you're weak, where you're strong, how you stacked up versus how you thought you were going to stack up. And then the next week, knowing that it's entirely different. So one week might be close grip bench press. The next week might be your best grip bench press with 30% of chain. The next week might be your best grip with, number one bands. And that motivator is like, it's always like, it feels exciting to show up, to like really go for it each week at achieving the best result you can on that day with whatever bar, accommodating resistance box that you're using versus the linear progression system, which is just like, I found for me as an athlete can just be like, fuck, like, I can't believe I have to add 5 more pounds that next week. Like, it's just grindy and feels much more temporary in how long you'll get value out of it. Versus for us, it's been, I've been training conjugate now for I think 8 or 9 years since the first time I went out to Ohio, maybe a little longer. But week to week, I'm motivated. Mondays and Wednesdays, like I'm showing up to try as hard as I can on whatever that bar is. And I think that's worth it. I think that's the same thing that positively affects CrossFit athletes, is that it's not the same metabolic conditioning workouts like week in, week out. It's like the opportunity to challenge yourself to something new and a new stimulus is like one of the things that motivates athletes to stay training super hard.
It's proven that people who are introverts need less stimulation in training, and they might get away with linear periodization like you were talking about. But good training should build you just physically, should build you psychologically as well. And we don't want to lay out training to add a psychological stress that's a negative. So when you're getting to the point where, like you were talking about, maybe you add 5 pounds and next week you have to add another 5 pounds for the same amount of reps and sets, but you barely made the 5 pounds the previous week. It's a stress when you're an athlete who you always want to succeed. You always want to win. You always want to improve. And when you know you barely made that, and this used to happen to me in high school, I didn't take it as a negative. I'm like, in my mind as a kid, I thought, man, I can will this to happen. It's just 5 more pounds. What's 5 pounds? Like, I will attack this with everything I have. The problem is I attack it with everything I have every week. So eventually it's going to catch up. Even though I was 100% positive in my mind, I was prepping my mind every day for that lift. But what I didn't realize I was doing is I was creating a stress every day for the whole week until I got up to that lift that was actually lowering my chances to making that lift.
I think that ties into a lot what we talked about last week, right? Training's about adaptation. Obviously, max effort's one of the two major efforts, efforts we use, dynamic effort being the other. is that there's neurological variation in those two adaptations, right? They stress the nervous system in two completely different ways. And when you're talking about optimal training, that's where, linear periodization, the Milo story of carrying a cow up the hill at some point, we've seen that anecdotally is going to start to, not work so well. In CrossFit, it's a little bit different because our athletes are so on such the beginner spectrum of powerlifting that, they'll see great change just because of consistency and doing the same thing over and over. But when you start talking about optimal training for the long term, at some point, you can't just change from 12-week program to 12-week program to 12-week program. That's where I had the major, issues, not just with myself, but with other people, where the conjugate, you're optimizing your training, like by doing exactly what you said earlier, Shane. You're changing up the bars. It's a different, stress to the nervous system, making sure you're getting our dynamic effort days in, make sure you're getting your 80% spatial exercises in. Like, that's one of the reasons we see the conjugate system being so successful and why it relates really well to CrossFit. There's a lot of variation in it.
There's also an opportunity, I think, with maxes to see a athlete at the point where they sort of have worked past like capacity. Sometimes people send me videos of a 3 or 5 rep max, like, like the first one was good, the second one was worse, the third one was worse, versus like I find it much higher value to watch a person hit a single and see what happens. Like if the environment's safe and they're set up to be, protected via spotters, the safety pins are set appropriately. Everyone knows what they're up to. When you watch someone work up to a max, whether they're successful or not, everyone should have learned something about that athlete. Like the coach should now know more than they did before, and the athlete should also know more than they did before.
I was with Louis Simmons at Westside Barbell, assisting him with a seminar years ago. And I had one of my athletes there who's a world record holder in the squat. And after the seminar, Louis is like, hey, if anybody wants to stick around, she's going to be squatting maximally, and it'd be good for you to see how she warms up, how she works up to a max, and what the intensity looks like. Now, this athlete would miss a squat maybe once every year and a half, okay, which is extremely important as well. But the key point, when she started training, she warmed up, people are watching warm up, she hits lifts, and people are, going kind of nuts about the weight, but it wasn't the weight. What was actually really important is during this is actually one of the days she actually missed. We just got done in a seminar. I was talking about don't miss weight. We do not like to miss weights. We work up to the heaviest weight we have available that day. We don't go any farther than that. And she happened to miss a weight that day. Okay. But like I said, about once every year and a half, that's not often. But when she missed that weight, she had 2/3 of the way up and it looked like a hydraulic press stopped. She just stopped. And Louis said, "Do you guys notice anything interesting about that squat?" And everybody kind of looked at, well, she missed it. And you guys said not to miss weight, right? He goes, well, that's not what I'm talking about. He's like, if you notice, she never broke position. Even when the spotters finally grabbed the weight to put it back, which took a second because we gave her a second to see if she could make it, like knees didn't cave in, chest didn't drop. The position she missed in was perfection. He goes, she simply just couldn't produce enough force long enough to finish the lift. But he said it shows that the accessories were laid out properly to never break position. And that's a great thing about this conjugate system, where we constantly vary our angles, our lifts, whether it's a front squat, a back squat, wide stance, narrow stance, to a box, specialty bars, accommodating resistance, different deadlift variations, is that no weakness can hide, And, Chris is talking about optimizing training, and that is right. We don't do anything minimally. We don't do it maximally. We do it optimally. And that's something I learned from Louis Sims at Westside Barbell. You'll hear him preach that. You'll hear people like Chris, high-level coaches, talk about that. And that's a key part. We work up to the heaviest weight we have available that day, okay? And that also means that, to me, I can recognize a lot in an athlete just by speeds, right? So if Jesse came to my gym and I watched Jesse warm up, I can tell if he's on or not. I can tell if it's a good day for him or not. But let's say he flew out to my gym, he shows up, I'm like, whoa, man, he must be exhausted. He does not look his normal speed. Then I'm not going to take his favorite lift for a max that day, right? I'm going to come up with a lift that Jesse's never done, or a lift he hasn't done in a long, long time. Because what I really want is Jesse to walk away with the best lift he has available that day. So let's say I come up with a movement he's never done. He comes out, he hits it. He asks me, was that pretty good for, yeah, that was great. Doesn't matter if it was or not. It just means that as long as he has the best effort that we can that day. That's all we had available anyway. And then we'll move on to our accessories. Then what I'd have him do is 8 to 12 weeks later, come back to that movement. When his nervous system is on point, and he's gunning the way he should, and he hits a massive 40, 50, 60-pound PR on it, and he's ecstatic, right? He's like, man, training's going good. Really what I'm doing is, yeah, his nervous system was probably degraded. If he's moving the weight slower than normal, I know his nervous system's degraded. So what I'm doing is letting him recover. I'm hitting a heavy lift. We still get to train, but I'm giving him a very hard movement that he's not used to. So therefore, it doesn't have a negative psychological effect for him where he's like, ah, man, training's not going good. It just allows him to get the best lift available that day. And then I can actually stoke the fire and get him cruising 8, 10 weeks, 12 weeks down the road, bringing it back in once I see his nervous system's good and he's gunning again. And then he'll blow through it, and it just gives him momentum.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Like, I think just having those kind of options for, why you pick a bar, like a lot of people might start looking over, for us, we've got all the specialty bars in the wall, and they start looking through, okay, what am I the worst at? What am I, need the most work on? But, sometimes, yeah, it's just a matter of having a look, be like, how do you feel today? You're like, man, I feel, like a, sack of hammered dicks. It's, you can make a choice. You're like, I've never done this with chain before. You're like, excellent. Like, let's do that. It puts a number on the board. And that's the difference, I think, even recognizing the difference between a training max and a testing max. Like, there'll be times where, we like to floor press for a max about 10 days out from meet. Like, that's been a good predicator for us for where our competition bench is sitting. So that would be like a testing max. It's kind of like, just like, are our athletes on track? Can they show improvement on this? If they show improvement on that, it's likely they'll be successful at a meet, versus a day where you come in and you're like, man, I'm pushed to get here. The day's been crazy. Life is crazy. Work, home, whatever. I just want to like dig in, and then checking a bar. We're like, I haven't actually maxed out a, mega bow with number 2 bands before. It's like, sweet, let's do that. And you're like, it gets something on the board, and then being able to come back to that, like you said, like a bunch of weeks later, and retest that when you're feeling good. Like, being successful and building success on success, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, every session doesn't have to be, a humiliating beatdown on what you chose to select. It just needs to like be moving the needle in the right direction.
A lot of people think that it's hardcore to train to failure, right? And to me, it's like, that's what I wanted to do when I was a kid, man. Like, I went to everything I had, And what you realize is if you train to failure, you get really good at failing. That's what you train for. So if I want to be an expert at failing, I'm going to train to fail. I do it every week. I'm phenomenal at it. I don't want my athletes to miss weights. So in training, if they only miss a weight every year, year and a half, I don't expect them to miss weight in competition, and they don't expect themselves to miss weight in competition. I want to build that thought process, that mindset, and I talk, Jesse, the story. I had an athlete that took to a world championship and told him finally, hey, we're going to go after a world record squat. I didn't want this athlete going after a world record squat until they were 100 pounds above the world record, okay? Because I wanted to shut everybody down. I wanted to send a mental message to everybody to not even try coming after. Because if you beat someone's record by 5 pounds, you tick them off, okay? You beat them by 100 pounds, they change weight classes or sports, right? So, I want to send a mental message, right? And for my athlete and for other athletes that could compete against my athlete. So we show up to a meet. Louis Simmons cheers this athlete on. Athlete, has been squatting with me for a couple of years now. Had never missed a squat before. Just crumbles on the last warm up. I have to grab my athlete, pick my athlete up, put weight back in the rack. Just was kind of starstruck by Louis walking by, lost their concentration, and it all went to hell. Well, they were the first athlete up, so they didn't have much time. They had about 8 minutes, not 10 minutes before they went. They were supposed to have 15 minutes. They made some adjustments and switched spots. One of the lifters changed their opener, so this athlete went from was going to be the second person to go to first person. So they only had 8 minutes to go. Athletes, I have to take it again. I have to take it in. No. The next jump was another 50 pounds up. The opener was 50 pounds above what they just got crumbled with. Okay. I said, look, you have your choice. You can retake it back here and make it, and then miss your opener and probably bomb out of the meet. Or you can go sit down, relax, and envision in your head the perfect squat and repeat it over and over again until you walk up to that bar and grab it. I said, then you will make your opener and you'll proceed to break the world record, you'll raise it up, and you'll have a phenomenal meet. So I took the athlete, had them sit down. They went out, hit their opener squat, which was the worst of all three of them. It was a great squat. It passed, but you could see just a little bit of timidness to it. And then the second one went up faster, third one up even faster, and pushed the world record up by over 100 pounds. So the whole point of it is, if that athlete had trained to failure every week, why would they believe they would make that first attempt? Because when people train to failure, like I did in high school, and all of us do this, like everybody who trains will do what I'm just about to say. When we start off training and we work up to failure, and at first it's like I'd get a 5-pound PR on my bench every week for about 4 or 5 weeks, maybe 6 weeks if I'm lucky. And then the next week, my bench would drop 20, 25 pounds, right? Well, I didn't get 20, 25 pounds weaker in 1 week. My nervous system basically said, hey, my nervous system degraded as a protection mechanism, because it's like, hey, since you have absolutely no clue what you're doing, I'm going to try to protect you from yourself, right? And so that's what happened. If you train that way, how do you not know it's just one of those days where it's like, man, it just happens to be that time where my nervous system degrades and it happened to be on meet day. My job as a coach is to have you at your best on meet day. Who cares what you did the day before? You look at Usain Bolt. If I'm Usain Bolt's training partner, I beat him every single day in training, and I never once beat him in the Olympics, nobody remembers my name. They remember Usain Bolt's name. They know nothing about me. So my job is to get an athlete at their best on game day. And to do that, you have to get athletes not missing weight. They have to see a roadmap of why they should make it if something goes south in one of the lifts or in a warm-up, if it feels heavy, or if they miss an attempt and they have another attempt or two left. They have to have a reason why they can make that attempt. And what I love about this program is if you train optimally, not maximally, and you hit the biggest weights available to you that day, you will have a really good understanding when you're having an on day and off day, and you can make adjustments in your attempts. You see the CrossFit Games, and someone can pick their attempts on a clean or snatch or deadlift or whatever it is. Hey, it's better to take 10 pounds off that third attempt and make it than to have a 40-pound jump and miss it, and you don't have all that added onto your total. So and the only way you're going to really, really, truly understand that is if you really try to push PRs consistently without missing weight.
Yeah, I think also that pushes it when it's close. An athlete who doesn't miss will push through and make it. So even if it gets real ragged, an athlete who never misses will see that lift through. But an athlete who misses all the time, when it gets close, they'll be like, and they'll fail like they're used to doing. One of the pieces I always feel is really important to think about is trained response becomes a dominant response. So if you train often and in your training you miss, you are going to be someone who misses when you're pressured into a situation that what is going to be your dominant response when everything gets primal. And you're going to be someone who misses. When you allow those things to enter the system, there becomes more choices. When you never miss, the odd time you do, it should be a surprise.
And it teaches you something. How do you pay attention to something that happens all the time, right? Really, like if something happens every day of your life, it's easy to let it just kind of fade off into the background, and it doesn't mean anything, right? But if you miss once a year, you're going to stop and take a look at, why did I miss? Did I make a mistake in technique? Have I been sleeping well? Have I been eating the way I should? Am I stressed more than normal? You're going to start picking apart things. How's my training look? Let's go back and look through my logs. If you look at Pocket Hercules, the Olympic lifter, they talk about in his training, this guy's multiple world record holder. He's the first triple bodyweight snatch, right? And anyway, for a little while, he went to some competitions, his numbers weren't going up. Coaches said, hey, grab your logbook, we got to look at it. They looked and they noticed, whoa, your volume's down 8%. They didn't even realize it. Got his volume back up, boom, back to breaking world records. Okay? But if they got missed all the time, it was inconsistent.
Yeah, I think one of the things you guys are talking about that the max effort shows really well is an assessment, not just, obviously the one you just showed, but even the one that you talked about with the world record holder with the squat, she's got perfect technique, but, most people we're dealing with, we're going to see where the breakdown is. And one of the things I talk about in CrossFit when it comes to especially training others is I can find somebody's kinetic chain deficiency through a 1 rep max or through maximal metabolic fatigue, like a Murph. You can start to see the knees collapse in the last 100 squats after they've ran a mile. They're doing, it's like, okay, cool. Like you've got weak abductors or, whatever it is, they get toesy. So they're more, quad dominant, have a hard time. You can start to see these. And I think that's one of the cool things for me as CrossFit coach. We always kind of assess capacity. Whereas, the cool thing that, I found in Conjugate from people like yourselves is you can also use that same methodology in movement breakdown.
Yeah, I totally agree. So why we max, how we do it. I guess for us, people always give me a hard time because I like all the data. I like recording everything. I like knowing all my lifters numbers. Everything's written out in an old school logbook rather than saved online on some app and those sort of things. Because I like to look at it. I like to sort of see, and I like to go in with a plan. One of the things for sure is being able to establish a plan and heading into it where your mind needs to be focused on just the task at hand. And I personally, I don't want to see an athlete, especially if they're in the lifting realm, spending their time thinking about what should I jump to next? The plan should be laid out, and we should be able to follow that plan if everything goes perfectly. If something changes along the way, then we make an adjustment. But the plan is set initially to make life simpler. So for us with maxing out, for example, let's say safety squat, box squat, if you've got an athlete, the first thing we're going to do is look at what their previous is. So if they've got a previous number, we're looking to start with 5 pounds more than that. We'll start with the last number and we'll back it down 7 lifts. So from, for someone who's going to example, 500 pounds on a safety squat, box squat, we're probably going to say 135 is what they use in warm up. And their first lift will start after that. But that doesn't mean, I got in 7 heavy, hard lifts. This is 7 lifts, what's basically considered an empty bar. So that's probably somewhere between, 45 pounds and 135 for almost every athlete that I deal with. And then we build up from there. We're going to take 7 lifts to get to a new PR, and we're never going to tie it. So with the thing I hate the most, especially when I'm coaching a CrossFit class, it's I just tied my max. What should I do next? If I didn't see the lift and then tied the max, I was I don't know. What was your last jump? You're our last jump was 10 pounds. Okay, let's, shoot for 10 pounds or less on this next lift. And you're just hoping for the best. But if you can set yourself up to write it out, and so I've been writing my plans out for 8 years. I still write it out and I'll be I don't really like the look of that. And I'll scratch out a piece and then make a change. I still can't get it right usually on my first go. So for our athletes and for myself personally, we'll start 5 pounds over our 1 rep max. So if we're talking about 500 pounds as our previous safety squat, box squat, we're looking for 505. The lift that we'll jump by for our last 2, we jump by 5% or less, has been pretty successful for our athletes and is a good general metric in my opinion. So of 500, you've got about 25 pounds-ish to play with for your last 2 jumps. Because the point of maxing is the heaviest lift you can produce, not your last 3 heavy lifts accumulated. So always keep that in mind, is that it's your heaviest for 1. And if your last 2 lifts before your max were very expensive, the likelihood of you being successful or as successful as you could have been is definitely going to be diminished. So from 505, I might back that down, let's say 20 pounds to 485, and then back it down another 20 to 465. So 465, 485, 505. Those would be the athlete's last 3 lifts. And then from there, I would start to widen out. So I did a 20-pound jump, a 20-pound jump. Let's maybe say the next drop down would be 30 pounds. So it'd be 465 down to 435. And then let's say we do a 40-pound jump from there. So now we're down to 395. And then we do a 45-pound jump. That's 350. And then it might be 300, 225, something like that. Something that shows you're starting with a bigger jumps through your 7 lifts and then descending down to much smaller jumps as you get to that max. But once they hit that 505, like that's a PR. That's generally a stop, and there's no reason to hit another lift. The variation on this would be someone who's newer, the beginner intermediate athlete who or someone who is going to make everything has gone well. The last 6 months have been crazy. They haven't hit this since then, or it's 3 years old. You're going well over that. Then I might lean on some of the other lifts. So a safety squat, box squat, I definitely would consider their straight bar box squat, and then start to establish like a range-ish that they're going to be capable of hitting, and then try to do a best guess, and then build a 7 lift plan from there with a little wiggle room for variation. So this is where I would like have my little like arrow drop down of like, we could head on this path, or we might drop down and head this path, depending on how the athlete feels. Other than that, through those lifts, it's just making sure the athlete's warmed up. They've sort of greased the groove on the lift itself, and they're ready and prepared and ready to start those 7 lifts. They've got all the equipment they need, and they sort of hit that on a logical rest plan as well. So in our CrossFit classes, when we max out bars, I'll lay out a template for our timing. So it'll be like lift on the 0, lift on the 2, lift on the 4, lift on the 6, lift on the 9, lift on the 12, lift on the 15. And that kind of gets you done your 7 lifts in 15 minutes, starting with 2-minute rest periods or lifting on the 2 minutes and building to 3-minute rest period at the end. And that for most beginner intermediate athletes works pretty well. For the greater experience, that might get raked out to 5-6 minutes on a sort of like Monday or Wednesday night when our sort of skilled lifters are hitting maxes.
Yeah. So when you have you're talking about like a competitive athlete who is really strong, that 7 attempts actually still holds true, right? We just take bigger jumps. So instead of adding more sets, we take bigger jumps. I have some athletes that their first squat warm-up is a 100-pound plate on each side of the bar, and they put 100-pound plate jumps, and they just jump up 200 pounds at a time, okay? Well, obviously, those are strong athletes, That's not your typical, what you're usually going to see in a gym. But we still get it to about 7 attempts, no matter what anyway. Even though they're a stronger athlete, that just means we start with a higher number, we take bigger jumps. And we also go by a rule of thumb that our last 3 attempts are at and above 90%. So,
and that's where that 5%
correct.
Works out pretty well, right? So
Yep.
you've got 3, because I think, like, from my understanding of what I've read, is that you get 3 attempts at or above 90% before you dramatically start increasing your risk of injury. So, like, your risk of injury goes up and your chance of missing goes up substantially with 4th and 5th. Even for our powerlifters, it's extremely rare for us even to set a national record or whatever to take a 4th attempt, because I just think it's bad planning.
Yeah.
Like, especially at a meet where it's like, if you've set yourself up and you know what you're capable of, you should be hitting the most weight you can hit on the last of your 3 platform lifts. There shouldn't be a requirement for a 4th. And the chance of the athlete making it feels like most of the time at events, you watch 4ths and they're mostly misses.
Yeah, and even for us, like if we have a really strong, you're talking like a world record holder, like a big heavyweight, a lot of times we don't even take 3 attempts. We'll hit a first attempt, skip the second one, hit a third one. You have a big 350 to 500 pound guy who's putting 1,300 pounds on their back. We skip the second attempt. We're not worried about it. We train to do one thing, the last number. We don't train people. It's interesting. People ask me all the time, like, okay, so what do you guys do for an opener? I'm like, we don't do openers in training, really. We don't worry about it. If I'm worried about my opener, I wouldn't show up,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, you go to CrossFit, it's like, can you do Fran? Well, if I can't do Fran, why would I be here? I'm here to win Fran, to win this event for right now. I'm not here hoping I can do Fran, so for us, an opener is a warm up.
Yeah.
The second attempt should help us, work towards securing a win for us.
Mm-hmm.
Third
Sets
attempt,
the tone.
Yeah, sets the tone. And third attempt gives us that world record or PR or whatever it is for the athlete. So yeah, you're exactly right. It looks the same in a sense, no matter if you're a beginner or high level. It's just our jumps are bigger, but the percentages are the same in the same amount of attempts.
I think there's also a good learning curve there where you start to be able to have to look through your own data, like find those lifts. And the fact that you carry a logbook, that you keep track of your maxes, like that shows the intent of an athlete and also speaks to their nature. And that you can sort of then build up a plan that makes sense in training. And that training then becomes what we use in competition. Like the piece of that twice a week, every week, we hit maxes makes you very competent at the entire sort of spectrum of skill sets required to be a lifter who hits maxes. I find a hard time in my mind, like getting there with the idea of like 3s and 5s. Or like there's a lot of skill sets inside of just hitting a single, and building that plan is one of those. We send our athletes to meets. They carry a card with them that has all their warm-up lifts and their 3 platform lifts all sort of like laid out with sort of, and it also shows their personal best in competition, their personal best in the gym environment, and what the closest record is to them, whether it's provincial, national, world, so that the coach then can take that card as the athlete steps to the platform and have all the data in front of them, so that as they watch, as I'm watching that lift, I can sort of be like, okay, we're on track and great, or oof, man, this is not going the way it should, or doesn't look the way it should. What do we need to do? Do we need to just build this athlete up, be like, hey, we need to get it together. It's game day. Or is it like, hey, like what's going on? You're like, oh, my food was bad, or my weight cut, or, those sort of elements, and then adjust the plan as required. But the fact that a plan exists in the first place really makes the stress level for both the athlete and the coach significantly less.
Yeah, we do the exact same thing. And the only thing I really look at then is in the warm-ups, what's the speed of the warm-up? And if the speed is off, then I look at, was there break in technique? And if there's no break in technique, then I have to pay attention, because I might have to lower some numbers. If there's break in technique, and I know that athlete, if I give them a correction, they can fix it right away, then I'm not worried about it. We don't adjust the numbers. As a coach, and I know you do this, Jesse, the numbers that I give for my athletes at a competition are numbers they for sure 100% can do. Okay. So they know as long as they do their job and they don't break position, they're going to make the lift. Okay. There's things that can happen. Sometimes you see people miss lifts, or, you had to lower their numbers, and, the next day they wake up with a cold or something. They didn't realize they're already getting sick. They just didn't realize it yet,
Yeah.
Things happen, but if the technique is off a little bit, we just adjust that. If the technique is on, then I'm looking at, okay, athlete might be a little off today and we might not even know why yet. And we just make adjustments.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Safety.
Okay.
One safety of 1 rep maxes. And we kind of noted a couple of quite different points on this. But safety in the sense of, like, I think one of the things that definitely I deal with athletes and CrossFitters for sure is the feeling that hitting a 1 rep max is inherently more dangerous than hitting a 3, 5, or 8 rep max.
Yeah, so that's the thing, right? I hear that all the time as well. People are like, oh, I don't want to do a 1 rep max. I'm worried about injuries. I like to do 3 or 5 rep maxes. But for every coach out there, take an athlete who does a 5 rep max, okay? Or if you're an athlete and you do 5 rep max, film it, okay? I will tell you, at best, you can do 1 rep perfect. That 1 rep would be the first rep. And when you do a 5 rep max in a squat, your first rep might be perfect, but your second one slightly degrades. Your third one degrades even farther. And what you notice is every rep after the first one starts to turn into a little more of a good morning, until the 5th one will be the most extreme variation of that good morning that you're going to have. And we've talked about this before, where basically your quads, your glutes, your hamstrings, your big muscle groups, they can keep pushing the weight. It's your stabilizers that cannot maintain those positions for heavy sets of 5. So because of that, 1 rep maxes are actually safer than a 3 to 5 rep max for heavy loads, because you can do it and maintain perfect positions. Okay. That means less wear and tear in your body, less chance to have an accident, fall or anything during a squat. But if you think about it, if you're doing 5 reps and your second rep, your knees start to come in, which means that your butt pushes out farther out back and it bends you over. That's why you're doing it like a good morning. And your second one, your knees cave in even harder, meaning that you bend over even farther, and your third one even more, and fourth one even more, and fifth one even more. Your body, against its will, is getting put into positions it does not want to go in. Okay? So this is not good. This is how a lot of people who do 3 to 5 rep maxes lose mobility in their hips. Okay? For us, we don't have a problem. We don't have that problem with hip mobility, because we do a 1 rep max. So sometimes, even though people think, oh, it's less weight on your back doing a 5-rep max, we have to look at what, sometimes like, Winston Churchill, no matter how well laid out the plan, sometimes you have to look at the end result. Okay. And you can believe me or not, it doesn't really matter. Just video yourself squatting. If you think 3 and 5 rep maxes are where it's at, hit a 3 to 5 rep max. Tell me and tell yourself, do you maintain the exact same position the whole time?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. The breakdown there, I think, becomes pretty evident on 3s and 5s. And I think the other side too is like when you miss a 1 rep max, I guess there's also, I think, a misconception of what that actually means, of like the consequence of missing that max. Like the thing that I like about a max is when you miss a max, if it's a max, you are just shut down. Like it just stops. There's not like, oh, I can kind of grind out this lift and it's going to be miserable and compromise. It's just, you should be at a spot where it's perfect and it's going to work, or it's not perfect and you're going to get shut down. And then it's just a matter, I think, of just having those pieces in place that make the difference for safety. Yeah.
Well,
I think, go ahead.
Well, there's a couple components to it, right? Like it's also easier to teach a 1 rep max. If you pick up a weight and you squat it, and I'm like, okay, on that rep you didn't sit back far enough. Your next rep, maybe you have to push your knees out harder. 3rd rep, you didn't take enough air and brace your abs well enough. If I'm doing 1 rep and I give you 1 fix, next time you fix that, you feel what that fix feels like and how much more it helps. And often I'll give someone a fix and the next set is heavier and it goes up faster than the previous set. Well, then the juice is worth the squeeze. You remember that as an athlete, right?
Yeah.
But when you do 3 reps or 5 reps, what am I supposed to say? Okay, on the first one, you didn't brace your abs hard enough when you picked it up. Second one, you didn't sit back far enough. Third one, your knees came in. Fourth one, your head got kind of loose and forward. You're not going to remember all that, and you're not going to be able to implement that. And then often we hear you'll hear some football coaches say, yeah, I don't want my athletes doing 1 rep max squats. It's too dangerous.
Yeah.
Well, really, because in a 1 rep max squat, we actually have the Golgi tendon reflex that can happen to keep us from pushing too far and getting hurt, right? So basically, the Golgi tendon reflex happens, and it keeps you from producing more force if you're on the edge of getting hurt, and that can help keep you safe. But if you watch 2 football players collide on a field, the Golgi tendon reflex never gets to happen. It is substantially higher injury rate playing on the field when you don't have that safety mechanism in place that does work while you're doing a max squat, max deadlift, and max bench.
Totally. And I think just the environment you train in makes a difference, right? Being able to train in like a, good CrossFit gym, powerlifting gym, like where athletes and the people you train around are really competent, I think makes a big difference. For us, there's no world on the CrossFit or the lifting and athlete side where we're going to drop a back squat. Like there's just no setting it off the back to the floor when you can't make it. Like it just to me feels like such a terrible plan and bad idea that always, as soon as you are, what our piece is we'll say, as soon as you're unsure if you're going to make the lift or not, that's where you ask for spotters. And we'll put at least 1 spotter on each side for a squat. On a bench, it's just 1 person standing over you while you do the work. On a deadlift, if it's real bad, you just let it go.
Yep. And that's the thing, right? A lot of people, I think when you look at CrossFit classes, a lot of people used to Olympic lifts. Well, Olympic lift is so dynamic, there's not a way to spot that, right? That you do have to drop the weight. But that doesn't mean that you have to on a squat, as an example. And even though we drop it on a snatch or clean and jerk variation, we don't want to drop it on a squat because we can do it in a safer manner. And when you have spotters that are an inch away from that bar, and when you stall out, if you start to break position, they grab that bar, they don't give you the time or opportunity to get into positions where you can hurt yourself.
Totally.
And it allows your mind to completely focus on the task at hand without any stress or worries. And that's a key important to producing bigger numbers, but also staying safe at the same time.
Yeah. And I think it's a big deal because I think on top of that, the fact that you can push it to that edge is that with time and good training partners, what you start to develop is that habit with the other athletes where as you start to drive, if you're driving the hole on a back squat and you feel it's starting to close down and get real dark, you can keep working at capacity because if you get into a bad spot Their spotters are there. If you have the opportunity, like, don't be the person working in a like R3 or R4 rack, squatting on the outside of the rack.
Mm-hmm.
Like, use the rack. Like, set the safeties. Like, at any time, squat or bench press, if you're working in a rack, work in the rack. Set those, know the safeties. So you've got your warm up. Set those safety pins 2 inch below the lowest spot you're going to end up, and then problem solve. Like, even if your spotters miss it, if something crazy happens that no one else can control, there's still no world where that bar should do you harm.
A friend of mine, Kara Bohegan, was a world record holder in the squat years ago. 148 weight class. She was a high 500-pound squatter at the time. And she was competed in nationals and weightlifting and stuff. She was a really good athlete. And she went to a gym that wasn't hers, walked a squat out, walked 185 out, was warming up. The spotters weren't paying attention, even though she asked some people to spot her because she's an experienced lifter and knows that things can happen anytime. They weren't paying attention because it's like, hey, it's Kara Bohegan. She's got a big squat, right? Like, don't have to worry about her with 185 when you're a high 500-pound squatter. And she lost her balance, blew her knees out, and that ended her squatting in her career for powerlifting. She did bench only after that. And so, here you're talking about a world record holder in the squat, and it can still happen to someone at a high level. So don't take for granted, things can happen at any time. So keep yourself as safe as possible to allow your mind to go as far as you can with that lift as well. Yeah,
that's the thing always, no matter how good that squatter or bench athlete is, like, if they're on the platform, with competition or not, if someone's going for it, those spotters, those hands should be so close to not touching it. This is different. As soon as you put your hands on it, that lift is over.
Yeah.
But the hand's close enough that you're like, if it doesn't go well, that all of the spotters are right there to grab it, protect that athlete, and protect the other spotters so that you don't have to worry. Like, I would say in 12 and a half years of athletes maxing lifts twice a week that we have, we had a wrist injury 2 years ago, maybe. I could think of like a wrist injury is the only thing off the top of my head that I could think of that we've had as a byproduct of like, a spotting error or, a max effort gone wrong, where you've got spotters. Like, every other time for hundreds or thousands of lifts that we have performed those lifts safely every time. Chris, how you doing there, man? Oh, maybe we lost him again. Are you back?
He's there.
Not so fun when it doesn't.
So,
I'll make sure that's I'll get this plugged in.
sorry, you can be our model for today.
What's that?
Yeah, no stress, man. No stress.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. So then I guess the other side that ties into safety is the other thing that people often talk about is the difference of, is it appropriate to have people going to 1 rep maxes so both youth that sort of like 19 and under, and then that sort of masters where you're starting to get 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond. I guess the one thing that, we've got 60, 18 and unders who train with us. And I guess the biggest thing I'd say when I'm explaining to parents is that you can work up a 1 rep max for that day without putting them in a position where they're compromised or going to fail. For a youth athlete, like we have our youth athletes max out, but that's the max for a youth athlete in our gym is where mechanics start to break down, and that's enough.
Yep. Yeah, we go for our youth athletes. We go basically as heavy as they can go while maintaining positions. I had an 18-year-old girl break a world record in squat. So obviously she went all out, but she maintained good positions, And it's funny because, like I was talking about, earlier, the Golgi tendon reflex can help you, helps you from getting injured many times, like in a lift, right? But that reaction from the body does not happen if you are a football player and you guys collide, or you're playing soccer and someone slide tackles you. Like, you're not going to get saved by that, right? And it's funny because how people who, like, their kids are 14, 15 years old and they play football and they're like, well, I don't want them getting hurt, maxing out. It's like, they play football, they collide with each other, like in positions they can't control, so I'm going to control a position. And what's interesting is if you think about it like this, man, all three of us in this room, I'm sure we could tell stories about when we were kids, things that we would do. But I remember we used to have this TV antenna next to my house. And so I'd climb up it and jump off it and be like, okay, I can go up one more ring and jump off it. Like, I don't know what I was thinking. How do you know when you can't jump anymore? Your legs break, but, you just keep going up. And I'm like, okay, like, I want to get to the point where I try to jump off the roof, kids do stuff like this. I always explain to people, I'm like, hey, look, if you take a bunch of 12 or 13-year-old boys for a kid's birthday party, and let's say, you live kind of out in the country and in your backyard, you have a bunch of big rocks, right? Nobody's going to go up and go, okay, that should be about 70% of your max. Let's see if you can lift that and how many reps you can lift it for. No, the kids will find the biggest rock somebody maybe can lift, they don't think, and then they all fight to see who can try to lift that heaviest weight, right? It's like, oh, no, you're not worried about them going out playing outside trying to do that, but you're worried about me making sure they're in perfect positions and working up to a 1-rep max. And, I try to tell people, it's like, you talk about running and, running can be, there's a lot of different studies, but anywhere from like 5 to 8, 9 times your body weight on impact. Or kids will get in a swing and they'll swing as high as they can and jump off that swing. It's like, for a split second, they're like at 9 times their body weight on impact. So if your kid's 100 pounds, it's for a split second, it's 900 pounds of force, right? Well, how much does that 100-pound kid squat? 150, 170, maybe they're really strong and hit 200 pounds.
Yeah.
It's nowhere near the impact they take in everyday sport in just pure play.
Yeah. Good old school play. Yeah. We grew up in the country and, you drag the trampoline to like the next highest thing you can jump from. And eventually it's the peak of the house. I remember watching friends jump off run off the edge of the roof, hit the trampoline, just like and just the wind knocked out from the heels click in the back of their skull as they, triple their speed straight off the trampoline. Just get up and you're like, it's like, oh, it's okay. It's good. Like, do it again.
The good old days when your spine could fold in half and you could still walk away from
backwards.
it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Wind knocked out of you backwards.
Yep.
Oh man. I think that's totally true. Definitely in our area, like we've got a ton of very high end youth who, mountain bike, BMX, all kinds of snow sports, all the snow sports, like crazy high level of climbing, water sports. Like there's just a huge amount of things that are going on in Squamish, and these kids who there's places that like only 3, maybe 4 athletes. Trails they've ridden this trail. So there's like a mountain bike trail that only a handful of people have ridden. Like, a couple of years ago, 3 of the 4 people who have ridden it trained with us and were 18 and under.
Yeah.
You're like, and the parents are like, well, it's pretty dangerous, and they're happy to have them go do that. But then as soon as you get into like, oh, we're just having the youth, like we have a lifting program for teens. They're like, oh man, I don't know. And it's like, it's a funny thing that exists out there, but I think also because I think in some ways it exists because there has been terrible choices made, and kids do get hurt lifting when they're mostly left to their own devices, and just like going for it with a bunch of other bros at a regular gym, like that story doesn't exist in good gyms with good coaches and structured programs.
You look at Westside Barbell, right now Dave Hoff has the biggest total in the world. He's a couple 100 pounds above everybody else. And he started Westside Barbell when he was 14 years old. And they talk about, what if they stunt their growth? He has 2 brothers and a dad, and they're all the same height, or they're an inch shorter than him. He's the tallest one out of all, only by an inch, but he's the only one who lifts heavy. And Westside's built the youngest male world record holder of all time. At one point I had the youngest female. I don't know. It might have been broken. I don't know. I had an 18-year-old who did that. But, when you look at it, we talk about age groups, and then we talk about masters competitors, right? And Westside Barbell produced the oldest world record holder of all time, male and female, 48 and 47 years old for their world records. And it's one of the things that, people will talk about, like, well, as I get older, I don't get hurt. It's like, you know what? I'd be more concerned about losing capacity. I have a lot of doctors who train at my gym, and one of them just said the other day, they're like, one of the first thing I look at when someone elderly comes in is their musculature and their legs and glutes. because that tells me how long they're, like about potential for longevity in life and quality of life. He's like, because if they don't have any muscle mass, he goes, I know they're not strong, and that's going to limit the output they have as they get older, and that's going to shorten their life. He's like, so if I have someone who's older come in, they have good muscular in their lower body, he's like, I know they have the potential to push at a higher pace in life for a longer period of time, which will help them live longer. Okay.
100%.
So, it's funny. People always worry about training hard, like, oh, I'm worried about putting some effort in and trying to improve myself, and, but, we have to look at bigger pictures. And the thing is that the stronger we are, there is a day and age where our strength starts to decrease no matter what we do. Okay.
Yeah.
Whether it's, 65, 75, 80, whatever age it is for you, there's an age you're going to hit. Well, you know what? I would rather hit that at being twice as strong as if I wasn't training. So if I'm degrading at 5% a year, it's going to take me a lot longer to get to where you're at, and so it's a key thing,
I was just going to say, talking about what your doctor said, lean body mass is one of the, more talked about research right now amongst the medical field with, people getting into their older ages of life. And, to go along with that too, is just the independence of the person. I've got a 76-year-old now that I've trained for 15 years. And, I didn't really get into maxing with her until, we've been doing some training for about 4 or 5 years. But when she first started, her first max deadlift was with a 15-pound bar on blocks, with no plates. And, about 4 or 5 years ago to get her body weight at 140 for 3. And like, this is a, lady now that I know over the weekend, I'll see her on Tuesday, that she was up in an attic crawling around, cleaning out insulation and shop vacuuming and laying insulation. Like, this lady's got a tremendous amount of independence. You need her to carry ladders upstairs. Like, these are all things that she couldn't do before. But when you start lifting heavy weights, not only does it psychologically motivate you, like she gets super fired up to hit new numbers, but it also gives you confidence when you get into your later stages of life that you can go and pick something up without, hurting yourself, especially if nobody else is around.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think that's why a lot of times that you see videos of people like, oh, look at this athlete. They're 85 years old. They just ran their second marathon for the year. Like, endurance. Like, when that goes, it's over. That's the end of the line. But like, strength often disappears so far before that. And you're starting to see it more now of videos on the internet of this, look at this 90-year-old lifting this. And I think that's what we're going to see more and more of over this next, 10, 20, 30 years is the strength capacity of masters athletes. I think is going to go through the roof. I think we'll see the greatest disparity we've ever seen between the very unhealthy, very unfit, and the strongest people we've ever seen at age, where you're starting to get people producing substantial results in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, just because it's much more part of culture, I think, or much more available now because of stuff like CrossFit, of getting people moving and moving well and introducing them to lifts. And then people potentially like moving from there to sports or powerlifting, the iron sports, because of that initial introduction. And then they'll have a career of, I started CrossFit when I was in my, mid 40s. And then in my 50s, I switched to powerlifting, and I've been powerlifting now for, 20 years. And the numbers they'll produce, I think, are going to be shocking to what we're currently seeing. But I think a lot of the pieces still come down to the same principles at sort of like at any age. It doesn't matter. Like, don't move poorly. Recognize when you struggle with a range of motion or mobility piece, fix those errors along the way, like build all the accessory and get stronger. And when you get to a max, if you mechanically start to like break down, stop. You don't have to take another lift. Like, if like we've got guys who are in their mid 60s who can't squat to depth. They don't want to compete for powerlifting. They just want to be as healthy as they can. That's fine. For them, they're going to box squat. And we're going to box squat them to an 18-inch box, week in, week out. We'll still switch specialty bars. We'll still use accommodating resistance. They're still getting a super solid stimulus, and they're doing it safely every single week, week in, week out. If something changes, like your mobility improves, their health improves, and we can lower that box a little, for sure. But if going below that range of motion for them compromises their health and safety, like, you don't have to do that. It's what the athlete needs for what they're trying to achieve with their goals.
Yeah, definitely. I have a guy that's in his early 70s, 73 years old. And he still goes hella skiing, you know? So you look at that, it's like, and he'll go out like in the Alps and different areas like that. And he'll do hikes, up in altitude in Patagonia, like 3-4 weeks out in the middle of nowhere, up in altitude and just pushing it every day. He goes snowshoeing, like he'll, be in Glacier this winter, snowshoeing and stuff, but he is just nonstop going. But what do we think about older people? We start thinking, you mentioned someone older, people start thinking about your rounded back and all that.
Yeah.
You think about breakdown in positions, right? He walks in, perfect posture, moves well, moves good on his squats. Does he move a ton of weight on squat, deadlift? No. He moves good weight for his body weight, and for his age, he moves great weight for his body weight and age. Is it something that's going to blow your mind? No. What'll blow your mind is the things that he loves to do that he does with it. Don't go ride 100 miles on a bike with him. If you want to do a century with him or do a hill climb with him on a road bike, good luck with that one. You want to go skiing with him? Good luck with that one. He uses not for powerlifting, not to be a strength athlete, but to do the things he loves to do in life. And that's a little kind of a misconception is like, I'm not asking you to do conjugate to powerlift. I'm looking at right now, CrossFit has shown us teenagers that are absolutely amazing and have great builds and have tons of capacity and potential to do all kinds of things in life. Some of them will stay with CrossFit. Some of them use CrossFit to go into another sport, but no matter what, it improves their quality of life. But the biggest thing is you have to have the output, the position, and maintain positions for whatever you do that you enjoy life and whatever activities you want to be able to do, And so, people will say, well, how do you adapt this for an elderly person? It's simple. Like for the skier, I only box squat. I don't do regular squats with them. There's no need to. I just don't have to do that. But we work up to 1 rep max, or we work up to where we're like, okay, this is a good single, and maybe do 3 singles at that weight, and then we look at like, where is he losing speed at, or again, breakdown position, and then we choose accessories to fix that. For me, talking to him, I'm like, okay, once hiking season comes around, my accessories are actually based around hiking. Okay. When ski season comes around, my accessories are wrapped around skiing, and that's how I choose the accessories, for him to maintain positions in these things that he pushes real hard, because he's beyond capacity to have to worry about getting hurt going up and down stairs, getting injured doing any, normal things in life. What we have to worry about is when he's pushing it, when he's doing the things he loves to do that's on the more extreme end. And that is what our accessories are chosen for.
And also more dynamic, right? That's the other piece too, is that one of the things that is amazing about maxing stuff like squat, bench, dead is there's such stable and controlled patterns that it's easy to be like, nah, this is like, no, I'm stopping this. And you could take a bench bar away. You can have spotters take a back squat. If you're unhappy with the position as a coach, you can just call that and halt the lift. Versus a lot of like dynamic sport where those people are out there, they're just going for it. And by the time they realize there's a weakness in their system, they've made an error, they can be too late, and the cost can be pretty pricey. Like, again, like I said, we're in a very active outdoor sport region of the world, with some of the best quality outdoor stuff in the world. Bias, but true, I think. Yeah. And the exposure is there for sure. Like the thing I feel like we can offer our community, that's the best possible thing we can offer our community, is let us help you build a strength base. Let's build a diverse, well-rounded strength base. And that's where, like, I don't want them just doing 3s and 5s with a straight bar, because they're like, these are athletes. Their sport is dynamic and really different. Like, keep them interested, but keep them moving through different ranges. I know, like, for myself, the first time I broke 500 in competition on a back squat, I got pushed forward a bit. And I remember thinking as I came out of the hole, I was like, this sucks, but it doesn't feel as bad as a safety squat. And I knew that I was going to be fine. Mm-hmm. I knew that I'd see that lift through and be successful, and then be able to still put together a deadlift at the end of that competition, right? Like those specialty bars, the accommodating resistance, like it builds such fantastic qualities for CrossFitters and sport athletes, that it's a huge, and you don't end up being slow athletes. Like, I find that the 3 and 5 athletes and the progressive overload athletes that you run into, like, they're slower moving. They look slow, and I feel like they've got limited power through the hips. Our best gym results for a box jump standing start is our powerlifters.
Mm-hmm.
They or our sport athletes who train powerlifting with us. Yeah. They produce consistently the highest results in those, and we get those using bands, chains, box squats, like variations on those max lifts, and variations on jumping, right? And that builds tremendous force.
So think about what makes you feel old, right? If you lose strength, lose speed, and lose agility. Well, the more variations in lifting that you do, you get better in all different positions. You learn how to use your leverages. You learn how to stabilize and balance positions. You learn how to accelerate out of positions, okay? So the constant variation, front squats, different depths in squats, good mornings, different stances and deadlifts. This allows people to accelerate from all different angles, different positions. And it does create a type of agility that these athletes are moving from all different types of positions, and they learn how to optimally accelerate out of those positions. But you're right, when you do those 1 rep maxes and you do the speed work on top, our athletes move extremely explosive and fast. So as you get older, maybe you're not as fast as when you were younger. But if I can take a 75-year-old and get them to move like a really athletic, healthy 40-year-old, we're winning, And so by doing the constant variation, we don't have to worry about repetitive motion injuries. We don't have to worry about overstressing a one set area where we create a mobility fault. We, again, like I said, learn to accelerate from all different positions and angles, which is extremely important as we get older. As we get older, we limit our movement. You look at little kids and they're like crazy. They get in about every angle and position by the end of the day, right? Like they're tumbling all over the place, jumping over stuff, running all different directions, changing directions quick. And as we get older, we spend more time on a computer and a desk or driving places, and we start limiting our movement and limiting the diversity in our movement. And that limiting of diversity is huge. And that's why I said CrossFit is a phenomenal thing for older athletes or older people who want to train. People like, I'm older, I don't think I should do CrossFit. It's like, you want to do the bar step overs, the box jumps or box step ups. You want to do all these different positions. These are things that help you go up and down stairs and deal with the different things that can come up in life that don't come up often. But when they do, if you do not have the agility for it, that's when you get hurt. And we want to avoid those things. And, this linear type periodization of training and doing the same thing over and over again, the same positions over and over every week is just not going to cut it for an elderly athlete. It's not going to give them the qualities they need. They're usually very limited in time, whether they have work still or maybe they're done with work and they have grandkids and family and they're trying to live this post-retirement life and do the vacations and things they've always wanted to do. They're limited on time. They're not going in and trying to train 2, 3, 4 hours a day. They're not a CrossFit Games athlete. So we need in a condensed time period, the ability to give them a lot of variation to help keep them safe and well balanced.
I was going to say, Greg Glassman used to have a great quote that the needs of the Olympic and the elderly differ by degree, not kind. And I think, that's the thing with the conjugate system.
Totally.
Just working it in a different way. The principles remain the same. It's just like, obviously, we're going to be more careful. We're going to focus on good movement patterns before we start, really loading those patterns. But we still want to lift heavy because it has tremendous functionality to everyday life.
Yeah.
You're 100% right.
I totally agree with that. Equipment, wrist wraps, belts, knee sleeves, for sport athletes and CrossFitters for maxing out lifts.
So, for me, I do like a belt. I suggest to a lot of people to work up to 80% of their max without a belt and put a belt on afterwards. That way, as you get stronger, eventually what your max with a belt is something you'll do raw without the belt. So it progressively goes up with you in time. The reason why I like a belt is because it teaches you how to brace your midline really well, and it gives you something to push against. This allows you to move more weight, and so your body can adapt to heavier stress. Your quads, hamstrings, glutes, whatever, say in a squat as an example, will push a heavier load because of that. And that's why I do like to lift without a belt up to a percentage. Then I put it on afterwards so I can kind of exceed a little bit of a percentage. Knee sleeves, I like those for athletes for the knees to stay warm. Some athletes really need them and it works well for them. I don't wear them, but in all honesty, like I'm probably going to start. Yeah, it's winter time right now for us, and my body just does not like the cold like it used to. So we're going to make some adjustments in that. But knee wraps, again, it's like a form of accommodated resistance. You can squat more weight with a knee wrap. So you can use that if you schedule it into your programming as more of a one of those weeks where you would overload your numbers. This will also help you be able to squat higher without knee wraps down the road because your nervous system will adapt to a heavier load stress upon it. Also, something we don't normally talk about is I actually do believe that raw lifters should get briefs for squatting. I'm not saying they should squat in briefs all the time, squat briefs. For anybody who's not familiar with them, for powerlifters, they have things called squat briefs. They're a really thick, strong material that stretches, and we wear them, and they put
stretches is a bit of a stretch.
They stretch when you get a few hundred pounds on your back, or maybe 1,000 pounds on your back, or something. But what they do is they keep your hips nice and tight. They keep warmth in there, and they keep compression. So they actually lower the injury rate. They put compression around the hamstring, around the quad, through the glutes. It lowers injury rate. You can move more weight with them on. So again, your nervous system will adapt to that heavier load. You'll learn to pick up, say, another 50, 60 pounds more on your back. So you'll learn how to pick that weight out of the hooks. You'll learn how to step back with that properly and optimize it. Remember, in sport, we want to eliminate all excess movement. Excess movement is only an opportunity to make a mistake and not reduplicate as high a level and increase injury rate. So when we take the weight out, we'll get underneath it, brace, get perfect position, squeeze our quads and glutes to stand up. I take one step per leg. That's it. Screw my feet into the floor and get myself set before I start my lift. But I do, I'm not saying to wear squat briefs every time you train. I'm saying to cycle it in. If you have anything that's kind of irritating or tired or you're a little worried about, wear them. If you need to stay warm with them, that's good, wear them. But we use it, again, as a portion where we would overload. So equipment's not a bad thing. It just should be used at a proper time. Yeah.
I think, I think the briefs are actually a really overlooked piece. I started using briefs for the first time in June of 2020 and kind of did a 9-week cycle of dynamic lower in briefs. So I was box squatting with briefs for a 9-week wave using the appropriate percentage based off of using briefs. And I found it takes a ton of pressure. It puts a ton of pressure into the hips, but it takes a ton of load that the hips would otherwise do. But that just pushed it up for me to where I felt like I got a ton of like mid and upper back development from using briefs. And I felt it push my deadlift way up suddenly. Like I added like 40 pounds to my dead through that sort of like through about a 4-month time period where I was using briefs. And I just felt like, I was like, man, I just feel like when I start pulling, like my back is just unstoppable.
Yeah.
And I just felt like it was a lot of the strain of using briefs. I think, and then a lot of the value of using briefs because it was taking the load from the hips breaking down and forcing everything else to grow and adapt to big weights for me in those other areas that the briefs otherwise weren't.
Yeah, you use equipment. You don't rely on equipment. You use it as a tool to get you to another phase. A lot of people wear wrist wraps. I have my athletes wear wrist wraps, my competitive powerlifters. In all honesty, I have small wrists, which is, but for whatever reason, I have strong forearms, so I don't wear wrist wraps. Just never really had a need for them, but I've seen plenty of lifters get a lot more out of using wrist wraps. Maybe if I really pushed hard, like in competitive powerlifting, really want to push my bench up, then yes, I would put wrist wraps on. I mean, hey, even if it helps, who knows if it helps for 1 extra pound might be all you need for a record, right? And so I would use it for that. Again, it's just you have to pick and choose what you use and have a legit reason why you use it. But I see a lot of people just, if they go in briefs, they just stop squatting raw. And I think that's a mistake too. I like my athletes to be able to do both. They should be able, the only thing you have is your body, right? Like you're not guaranteed to have equipment with you at any given day. So you'd better be good raw. If I can use equipment to enhance that and get to a higher level faster, sure, I'll do that. If it makes me last longer, yeah, I'll use that, but I don't rely on it.
Yeah, I think that's important too, is the idea of that it's like tools in the toolbox, and that it's not a Band-Aid. The athlete who comes up and is like, hey, my back's pretty bad. Do you think a belt would help? You're like, that is not your solution. The solution is not a belt to your bad mechanics. The reason to select a belt was like, especially if you're a competitive athlete, especially competitive CrossFitter, like given that knee sleeves are allowed out there, that a super tight pair of like SBDs are going to make for a different weight on that bar being moved. Same thing with wrist straps, same things with belts. Like, have all those tools at your disposal, and then be able to pick and choose like when you use them and why you're using them, because they certainly can add layers. And if you haven't used them before, you might learn stuff you otherwise wouldn't have. Certainly one of the things I got out of briefs was I felt like I understood what strain felt like. And then when I put on briefs, like it was a real different level. Like it was like I started bursting blood vessels around like both eyes and across my chest like every Friday. And the strain, even for speed work with briefs, felt so substantial. And it was 100 pounds over my box squat with briefs on, which again is a real different stimulus. And I learned things inside of that I found really valuable. And then taking off those briefs, you're like, I'm not going to be able to move the same amount of weight. But when I stand that bar out of the rack on a back squat and walk back, man, my confidence is so high.
I think you guys hit the nail on the head. I mean, if it's going to improve performance, like, let's mess with it. Don't wait till you have to perform to use it. I think grips are another thing with CrossFitters. Like, you better know how to use grips, and they better be well broken in so you don't slip off a bar when you're going for a big set of, pull-ups or bar muscle-ups. But I love that you brought the belt part in too, because, I know something we see a lot of level ones and just, some common trainers and more beginners. There's the bringing the belly button in, as the bracing. And, I think a lot of people just think the belt's there to protect your back, when in reality, it's a tactile feedback mechanism. Like it gives you the opportunity to drive as hard as you can. I know for me, Jesse, when I went to your spot, I used to have just a standard leather belt, I think from Rogue. And I got to the point where it's like, it was too soft. It's like, it didn't matter how I buckled it down. Like when I drive my abs against it, I just didn't feel the same. So kind of switching to that Inzer belt after going to yours. And it's amazing how, it almost cuts the circulation. You're pushing so hard. It's, it's very uncomfortable, but it's what you need for the feedback.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing too, is even inside of like a thing like belts, is not all belts are created equal. Like, there's a time for a CrossFitter for sure where Velcro belt is the right choice, but there's also a time for a CrossFitter, especially a competitor, to put on the like single prong Inzer belt or, lever belt, or, the difference between those wrist straps that the athletes put on and they twist that little tab through and they just roll them tight. You're like, this is not the same, like as a pair of like good, like Inzer wrist wraps, like that you're not playing the same game.
And you need to learn to use your equipment. There's all, like Chris was saying, there's all different types of grips that you can use. Well, depending on the apparatus you're using, the type of bar, maybe the coating on the bar, different brands, different companies, your grips can work well on one and maybe not another one. So having multiple different grips and knowing what to use them for. Wrist wraps. So we commonly see is people put a wrist wrap on as they put the wrap like where my hand is right here.
Yeah, right over the long bones.
But that's not going to move. That moves, we got bigger problems, right? If you move right here, we got big problems. But what I want is here.
Yeah.
Okay. So I bring that wrist wrap up here so that it goes over where my wrist would bend.
Yeah.
Right.
Casting the joint.
Where go to a gym and watch how many people put wrist wraps on. You'll see them right down here below that joint. It's not going to do you any good there. Having equipment means nothing if you don't know how to use it. So, find people who are better than you at using this equipment and learn.
That's pretty good, boys. I think anything else you guys want to tag on the way out?
I was going to say a certain amount of proficiency, but we kind of covered that part. And the only thing I kind of briefly heard to note that kind of came out was like getting amped up for lifts, but I'm not sure it really needs to be addressed.
This is definitely your wheelhouse, Shane. But I would say from like for the athletes that I deal with, man, sometimes it's to see where like they've done a great plan. They've got all the pieces in place. They do understand how to use equipment. They are proficient in the movement. And especially something like a deadlift where they get into it. And, we generally do well on deadlifts with our athletes is they get in that pull. And they're like, oh yeah, I just didn't want. You're like, it was the intensity. Like before you even say anything, that lift is over because of the intensity. And you just, I really feel like it's in itself, its own skill of being able to be like, okay, switch on. Like for me, it's always, I think about like when I tighten my belt, like I like having the single prong instead of a lever because I like the process of tightening that belt before I prepare for the lift, because that's my cue to like, if Shane and I are having a conversation, that as I go to tighten that belt, I, all like friends off until the task is accomplished. And then being able to perform that task with all of your focus intensity. One of the things I say with our lifters is when you see guys like, Shane has at his gym where they're moving monster weights. I remember being there myself and they're just like, I'm chalking up and they're like, come on, like, let's fucking do this. And everyone's yelling. I was like, okay, but I'm not that good. I got to think about it. I got to think about what I'm up to here as well. Like I can't, it's a balance of intensity and precision,
Correct.
Like when you can just be intensity, you have precision and you are a high skill athlete who's been in the game a long time.
I say it's like
For the rest of us, we got to balance those two things and be like, find that happy medium of like focus, but also like, I mean what I'm about to do.
Yeah. It's like we were saying, it's like precise controlled violence,
Yeah.
And it's funny because like Jesse's that guy that before a meet, he's watching like over the top. You turn the hat backwards, now you're ready to go, man. Like you got that cue, So which is great. Like I love that. But so that's the thing is like we have those things, right? I know I just dated myself with a movie that most people
over the top. No one's gonna remember that.
No one's gonna remember that movie, right? So, but anyway, for me, like I'll give you a good example. For any lift, I have a ritual. That ritual exactly happens exact same way. When I walk up to a deadlift platform, I start with my left foot, my right hand, my left hand, set, wedge, break bar, go. When I squat, I grab the bar with my left hand, my left foot, my ankle goes underneath the bar, so it's in line with the bar. My right hand goes on the bar. My right foot goes underneath, so it's lined up with the bar. And then I bring my chest to the bar because I can feel from the angle that if I'm loaded where my heels should be exactly where they should be. I should want to slightly fall back if I was to let go. So I know what that feels like. Now get underneath the bar and I set. Basically what I'm saying is I set a ritual. I lift the exact same way every time and I eliminate all excess movement out of that ritual. I see a lot of people have rituals, but I see these rituals with a lot of excess movement that's just not needed for no reason. Now, the feeling that Jesse gets when he hooks that belt is the feeling I get as I'm processing that ritual. Okay?
Yeah.
So by the time I hit the last step, I accelerate violently out of that movement. Okay? And I don't have to think about it. All I have to do is complete my ritual perfect and accelerate. And if I complete my ritual perfect and I start perfect, I will end perfect. If I don't start perfect, I can't end perfect. Okay? So to me, it's quite a few things. One, before you get that mindset of that seasoned lifter that really just has confidence, they've seen a lot, they've made a lot of adaptations, they've pushed weight and they understand the system, and so they see what the system does and they have that roadmap to build themselves psychologically. Before that, you become that. Create that very precise ritual without excess movement that will give you that ability to complete the lift before your mind starts to get to wander and think about it. And then as you've spent more and more time and you've gotten more successful and you very rarely miss weights, you'll gain this confidence. And, one thing, we talk about speed strength, right? For speed work. And that, is a strength that carries over into a lot of sports. Okay, speed strength. But there's also strength speed, right? And it's getting very good at moving heavy weight slowly. All right. This is a capacity that people will say, well, powerlifters are slow. We're not slow. We're moving very heavy weight. Heavy weight moves slow. Take a 1,000-pound squatter, put 225 on their back and watch a violent explosion happen, with 225, right? Take a 250-pound squatter, put 225 on their back. It's not going to be fast. So But what people who lift heavy for a long period of time get good at is we get very good at grinding, moving very heavy weight slowly, okay? And so your ability to grind with that weight will actually increase over time. So as long as your points of performance are perfected and you hit your ritual is perfect and you start in a perfect position, you will, as you spend time, get better at that slow, heavy grind. They always say that for lifters, we need two things. Like you usually either have you see that person who they deadlift 225 and like, whoa, they're about done. Like that's about all they have. And they pull 250 and 275 and 300 and it just looks the same every time. It's just so slow, right? And then you have that lifter who they squat 400 and it's like, oh my God, they're like an 800-pound squatter. And they hit 410, they get buried. And it's like, well, that guy was a speed guy. The first guy was your grinder. The best lifters are the ones who can do both. Now, if you're that grinder, speed work is your jam, man. You know, that's what's going to make you next level. If you're that speed guy, that heavy accommodating resistance, the heavy overloads, starting in positions where your leverages are affected. So like the good people who are fast and deadlift, they get a lot of momentum in the first 3-4 inches off the ground. So I like to put the bar 3 inches off the ground, take all their speed away and make them grind that weight because that's where they're going to make the biggest improvement. Those things will happen and those things will build your mindset over time. But first, start your ritual, eliminate all excess movement and perfect that. And it will help you. And when you get to the point as your mind starts getting stronger and stronger, you will become a force to reckon with. I said this before in a podcast, but every day we have choices. You can make the weak choice. You can make the strong choice. The only choices you should make are the optimal choice for you in your everyday life. And if you do that, often they're the hard choices. You do that every day, you become strong mentally. You take weak choices every day, you become weak mentally. It's just like working out. You work on increasing that capacity consistently, you will. You ignore it won't be there.
Good points. I think for sure that ritual piece is a big deal because even if you've got like an event and suddenly you've got nerves, if you built the ritual piece in to your programming for all the time you've been performing that lift, is that as you step to the bar, whatever that lift is, that as soon as you start that ritual, if you've done it always, it should just take over and it should allow you to flow a little more naturally and I know what I'm doing now. Mm-hmm. You know, when you put your one hand on the bar, you can feel that knurl in the hand as you duck under, you know, it's like, it's on, mm-hmm. you know, and it builds confidence and it get rid of everything. So the room empties and it just feels like it's you performing the task you've done so many times before.
You'll notice when people have rituals that have excess movement, that excess movement grows as the attempt gets heavier. You know, so you'll see people who like pump a lift or they do something, they'll do more repetitions on their third attempt than their first attempt. And I don't like that because that tells me that they're thinking about the lift. And the more of that movement they do, the more it's entering their mind. If they eliminate all excess movement, that means they're nice and polished. It doesn't give as much time for those thoughts to enter. And it means it feels familiar. And when it feels familiar, that's when you're going to be successful.
Yeah, especially stuff like deadlift, right? I always think, you know, deadlift starts standing tall over the bar. Yeah. Like the minute you start to head down to put your hands on that, like the train is already tipped over the edge and going down the tracks. Like get down there, get set, and get the fuck out. Like don't spend time.
Correct. I tell everybody at deadlift, start straight up, perfect posture as high as you can, because this is your end point. You know, in deadlift, you see people pass out sometimes, you see people black out. You can black out and still finish a lift, okay? But you have to neurologically set the finish position before you start. So you set straight up, go down the bar, grab, go. If you start to black out 2/3 of the way up, as long as you don't pass out, your body most likely will go through the range of motion until it hits full lockout. So I've had lifters that don't remember completing a lift and they got all white lights and completed their lifts. But that ritual has to be there, you know, for you to do that. And you have to start tall from the beginning so your nervous system has something to remember to go back to, you know?
Yeah.
And yes, if you black out, I do want you to complete your lift. I want to win. I don't care if you're conscious for it or not. Okay. Yeah, right.
Yeah. When I shouldered the Inzer Stone in Scotland like that, where I rolled it up, and in my mind, like I couldn't see. Once it got over chest height, I was like, oh man, I can't see or hear anything. And I just remember being like, keep pushing it up, and keep trying to get it to my shoulder. And I was like, go until you know you're going to black out, and then let it go. And I was like, okay, that's it. Like you're at the end of your line. And I tipped it forward, and it's just like, ugh, like, wobbled to the knee on the ground. And I was just like, how close did I get? And the people I was there was like, dude, you finished it and you just stood there. You just stood there doing nothing. You're like, oh, okay. Like, look at the photo. Yeah, that's not how it felt.
See,
all right,
proof.
boys. Yeah. We're about an hour 30 and change.
Cool. Be done.
Anything you guys want to add before I stop the recording? Okay, let me I'll stop the podcast here, or I'll stop the recording.
Conjugate Nation Podcast.